The giants believed that Loki stole Elbaf's legendary devil fruit, but just like we now know that Loki did not actually murder Harald, this was likely just another lie, based on new evidence from the manga. Loki did not only not eat Elbaf's royal fruit, but the fruit was in truth stolen by a character you all know from the government. I believe that this is the same character who orchestrated the massacre to kill Harald, and that during the commotion, he was the one who stole Elbaf's legendary fruit, and that right now in the story, it is him, not Loki, who is the fruit's current user. But to go even beyond this, I believe that this character is also the one who originally sent the God's Knights to subjugate the giants in the current arc. I think this character is none other than Saint Vigarland Garling, and that he is the secret main villain of the entire Elbaf arc. The reason why Loki very likely did not eat Elbaf's legendary fruit is simply because he likely literally could not have eaten it. In fact, Loki's flashback has already hinted that Loki was already a devil fruit user years before Harald's death. In chapter 1156, there is a scene where Loki, at 19 years old, almost drowned and had to be rescued by other giants. This scene in context, however, makes very little sense. Loki was born a freak of nature, who when he was just a day old, had enough strength to climb up the Adam tree all the way down from the underworld. By the time he was 19, Loki was already strong enough to tame Elbaf's wild beasts and to terrorize the entire island. It is incredibly hard to believe that Loki of all characters could have simply drowned. But what makes this scene even more suspicious is that the other nameless giants survived the ship capsizing and had to rescue him. These being the same giants Loki was already strong enough to beat while on land. What is also a very notable characteristic about Loki is that he loves to brag about himself and his accomplishments, whether it's about him being the strongest giant, a prince of Elbaf, or whatever else he can come up with. Yet despite this, Loki never brings up that he is the user of Elbaf's legendary devil fruit. We do however know that Loki is in fact the devil fruit user, as he in the present timeline has admitted that Sea Stone takes away his powers. Yet I believe that Loki had already eaten his fruit when he was just a kid, and it therefore would have been impossible for him to later eat his family's legendary fruit on the day of Harald's death. There is however an even bigger scene in the Elbaf flashback that suggests this than Loki almost drowning, and this happened during the massacre in Orr's castle, right after the scene where we see that Harald was actually attacked by his own royal guards. There is another scene of a shadowy figure discovering Elbaf's legendary devil fruit during the massacre. However, based on this character's dialogue, it is incredibly unlikely that this is Loki. The figure acts surprised at discovering the fruit, saying, "This is the treasure of Elbaf, the forbidden devil fruit." Yet, this would in context be very out of character for Loki to say. The figure talks in a way as if they had not known that this fruit actually existed before discovering it. But this would make no sense for Loki, who is not only a prince of Elbaf who's known about the fruit his entire life, but Loki also literally grew up in this very castle, which means that surprise should be the last emotion he'd feel upon seeing this treasure. There is a lot of evidence that this entire massacre itself was in fact orchestrated by the world government. Kaban says that during the day of Harald's death, he had sensed a strange haki coming from the castle. As Kaban had at this point already spent years living on Elbaf, this would suggest that the haki he sensed came from someone who was not normally in the country. What makes the idea that this haki came from someone from the world government almost a certainty is that earlier in this arc, Kaban said this exact same thing about sensing strange haki from the castle after Shamrock and Kunko had come to the island. What is even more notable is that when the Straw Hats later explored this castle, they discovered that the magic circle used by Shamrock and Kunko was still there. What Kaban's words suggest is that this magic circle that was used by Shamrock and Kunko had very likely also been used 14 years ago during the massacre. I believe that the world government character who had used this magic circle on that day to both kill Harald and to steal Elbaf's devil fruit was literally Garling. So far, the confirmed characters who've been able to use these magic circles are the 5 elders and the God's Knights. Yet we can already say that the character who created this Elbaf magic circle wasn't one of the elders. During the Egghead arc, we saw that all of the elder circles have special designs, where they are all numbered from 5 to 1. However, no such number appears on this Elbaf circle, and it is more similar to the circle we've for example seen Kunko create. Yet, I think it is also very unlikely that this circle was created by any of the God's Knights we've seen come to Elbaf in the present timeline. Loki 14 years ago witnessed the Horus Castle massacre from beginning to end, yet in the current story, he does not recognize either Shamrock or Kunko. While it is possible that Loki never personally saw the mastermind behind the massacre, Gaban's words about sensing strange haki from the castle seemingly imply that this person took part in the action. Loki himself is also seemingly very adept at using observation haki, as he was for example able to sense that Luffy would knock him out before it even happened. This should mean that just like Gaban, Loki should have been able to sense the haki from the day of the massacre from either Kunko or Shamrock, if they had been there on that day. It has also already been confirmed by the story that Gillingham couldn't have taken part in the massacre, as he literally says that the current mission is his first time coming to Elbaf. This finally leaves Sommers, but it is also very unlikely that he too was involved in the massacre. Jarl was another character present at the massacre, yet he seemingly does not in fact recognize Sommers' voice when hearing it in the current arc. Furthermore, even after fighting Sommers, Gaban still refers to the haki he sensed from the massacre as being strange, meaning that it probably was not the same haki he just now sensed from Sommers. If all of these other celestial dragons couldn't have been involved in the massacre, let me explain why it makes so much sense that the man behind it, and the man who's been manipulating this entire conflict between Elbaf and the world government, is very likely Garling. The reason why the world government is so interested in Elbaf is because they want the Giants to be their mercenaries in the final war. The government has been foretold of the great war that will come in the future of the story, where it is said that the allegiance of the Giants will be a deciding factor in this conflict. This is essentially the explanation for why the government throughout the series has been so obsessed with harnessing the power of the Giants, where they've recruited several of them to serve in the Marines, and have even done their own research on gigantification. What is however very strange is that the government for many years in the timeline did absolutely nothing regarding Elbaf. Elbaf was all but defenseless for years, where Harald and much of the country's military was dead, and even Loki was chained up, but the government still did nothing. Yet, right now in the current story, literally a day after Garling has been appointed as an elder, Elbaf has coincidentally come under attack by the government. I think this is more than a coincidence. I think that Garling may well have been wanting to invade Elbaf for years, and decided to immediately use his new powers as an elder to do this. Not only did the invasion happen right after his appointment, and not only was Elbaf invaded by Garling's very own God's Knights, but based on Saturn's words at the end of Egghead, the government before Garling's promotion had no prior plans to attack the Giants. However, why would Garling be so interested in Elbaf? By his own words, the government in the current story faces an unprecedented amount of rebellions, and has been driven up a wall fighting the Revolutionary Army and the Yonko. Why would Garling have chosen to attack Elbaf right now of all times, when the government is so busy with their other enemies? It is possible that Garling simply has unfinished business with the Giants, where the government years ago when Harald was still alive could have charged Garling with subjugating Elbaf. We already got a hint in this current flashback that Garling's job as a God's Knight was making unaffiliated countries join the world government, as this was the reason why he originally went to God Valley. Right before Harald died, he had also seemingly succeeded in making some kind of partnership with the world government, where he was even allowed to visit the Holy Land. There is a big possibility that the Figarland family was involved with this affair, where Shanks says that he himself was at the Holy Land at this time and got to talk to Harald. The fact that Harald later turned against the government is also well known among the God's Knights, where it is for example talked about by Sommers in this arc, and he even asks whether Shamrock was interested in going to Harald's grave. The character at the center of all this intrigue is once again Garling, who is not only the leader of the God's Knights, but also the head of the Figarland family. Based on all the information we currently have, here is what I think truly happened between Harald and the world government all those years ago. Garling could have very well been the one trying to make Harald the government's puppet. When Harald, however, turned against the government and decided to pacify the Giants, Garling could have seen him as a liability and planned to assassinate him. This then would have led to the massacre 14 years ago. Garling, however, could have not just wanted to eliminate Harald, but to use this to create an opportunity for him to steal Elbaf's legendary fruit in the process. Yet, Not expecting Shanks and Gaban to be on the island on this day, Garling would have decided to stop here and to simply conquer the rest of Elbaf another day. If Garling during this event also personally witnessed Loki's strength in the massacre, this could explain why he later decided to try to recruit Loki into the God's Knights. The notable thing about Garling is that the story is very clearly trying to make him one of One Piece's biggest villains, and fast. Even though he was just introduced in the Egghead arc, in this short span of time, Garling was shown among the most important final saga players at the end of Vegapunk's message, became a member of the Five Elders, and was revealed to not only have been at God Valley, but he was also the grand architect of the entire incident. If Garling is indeed also revealed as the hidden mastermind of the Elbaf arc, it would line up with how the story has already handled his character, where the manga is clearly trying to make up for Garling's late introduction by rapidly making him an extremely important part of the plot and lore of One Piece. Now, admittedly, even if this theory is true, and Loki did not eat Elbaf's legendary devil fruit, and even if Garling were to be the secret overarching antagonist of this whole arc, this still would not have to mean that Garling himself literally ate the fruit. The theory would still work if Garling simply stole the fruit for the government, or that he simply planned Harald's murder, but did not personally participate in the massacre. While this is definitely true, what I still want to argue is just how interesting Garling having Elbaf's legendary fruit could be for the story. The Giants and Loki are clearly set up to be hugely important in the final war, and will more than likely play a huge role in the final saga even after this arc. If Garling did in fact do all these horrible things to their people, but had also stolen their most sacred devil fruit, it would make him a potentially great future antagonist for Loki and the Giants. This could also be a great organic way to set up just how much of a threat Garling is, where he'd not only have all the aura of being one of the elders and the leader of the God's Knights, but also the user of one of the most powerful devil fruits in the whole story, which even Sebek himself thought would have given him a chance against him. I suppose one really important thing for me to bring up is that I also do not think this idea would take anything away from Loki not having the fruit, where if Loki did in fact already eat the devil fruit when he was a child, Loki's fruit could still be extremely powerful in its own right, even without it being Elbaf's legendary fruit. One caveat I still have about this theory is that Loki immediately noticed the resemblance between Shanks and Shamrock when meeting the latter, so if Garling was actually there during the massacre, Loki should have noticed it as well. However, I do not think this would be much of an issue for the plot. While Garling did resemble Shanks, this was only when he was really young, and we know he actually looks considerably different in old age. In the timeline, there is a 24-year gap between the God Valley incident and the Elbaf massacre, so it is very much possible that Garling at this point has already aged to a point where he no longer looked that much like his sons. Ahoy matey, you've now reached the dangerous stretch of sea known as the end of this video, where the wallet be plundered by ye becoming me channel's member. Me victims have been growing as of late, and it is now off to the brick with you before me crew will sell you off for ransom. Thanks for all the current members for the support, and maybe join if you want me to insult you in amateur pirate talk in the next video. Also, props to everyone who made it to the end of this video.